We might, in the interest of time, move on to the second presentation today. And we now have Dr. Shoecraft and Dr. Helen Massa and Dr. Leanne Kenway, who will be presenting on a project called Implementing Translanguaging Pedagogy in a Large First-Year Anatomy Course. I am absolutely spellbound by that title and I can't wait to hear more. Please, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, are my slides showing okay? Yep, awesome, thank you. Technology, I love it and hate it at the same time. So thank you for inviting us along today. Yes, we are going to explain the title, and every time I talk about translanguaging and anatomy, everyone goes, what? So yeah, we'll definitely sort of talk about that as well. I did just want to start as well, though, with acknowledgement of country. So thank you as well to Mikey and Danielle for your acknowledgement at the beginning. So I'm currently on Turrbal and Yagara lands as well. And I pay my respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, particularly in the current climate in Australia. And I think we need to continue our work in acknowledgement, but a lot of other things in terms of pedagogy and, you know, social justice and things like that, that I think are really important to be acknowledging as well in this type of work that we're all involved in. So I am, just as way of introduction, some of you know me already, so Kelly Shoecraft. Currently I'm actually located in the Learning Futures at Griffith, which is the teaching and learning unit for the whole university, so providing professional development for staff. But I am an applied linguist by trade and really interested in the translanguaging. So I'll explain a little bit of translanguaging shortly. But we have today as well my co-collaborators, Leanne and Helen are here with us. So Leanne, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. So I'm Leanne Kenway. I am based in the School of Pharmacy and Medical Sciences in the health group, and my role is senior lecturer in anatomy and physiology teaching, but my background is physiotherapy. So I try and always have that sort of authentic clinical approach to the way I teach anatomy. I'll talk a little bit about how and why I fell upon translanguaging in a moment, I think, when I get to a different slide, and why it's important to me. Helen?
Thanks, Leanne. Hi, and thanks for the opportunity to share our research project and our passion with you. It seems like a really welcoming audience, so that's lovely. I'm an anatomist physiologist, and I established the Griffith University School of Anatomy, so anatomy is pretty much my bag. I came here as an associate lecturer and there wasn't somewhere for me to play, so I created that space, and we've now built all the health programs to apply that anatomy towards my other passion, which is employability. So trying to educate people so that they can actually support community is a big part of what I love to do. And I'm recognised for being able to support less confident learners and for diversifying recruitment, particularly in Griffith Health enrolments into programs that are going to support communities more widely. So I'm really enjoying my collaboration with Kelly and Leanne, and I hope that you enjoy our project.
Thank you. So I'm in charge of slides, so if I mess up, it's all my fault. Leanne, do you want to?
So it's me. Yeah. So looking at how does anatomy fit into the linguistic space and what's that connection? Because as Kelly mentioned before, most people look at us sideways. Translanguaging, to me, they'll ask that question, what is that even? I also did ask that question to start with. But basically, anatomy requires an extensive discipline-specific terminology knowledge. And so many of, or most of, anatomical terminology is based on Latin and Greek origins. Lots of prefixes and suffixes, and there was a whole concept about learning language that I think in many cases we've approached it from a scientific point of view rather than a language point of view a lot of the time. So my initial experience was pre-COVID. I was traveling to China, to Wuhan, to teach a neuroscience course in English for them. And a number of those students were coming back to Australia then to enrol in one of our exercise science programs through the School of Allied Health Sciences back then. And my concern was the level of English that they had when they came back, and we were expecting them to just fit right in, even though that they had IELTS that they had to pass at a certain language, a certain level, sorry. I was well aware that even the content, the complexity of the content and the volume of the content for our monolinguals, our English only speakers, was already a challenge. So my course in particular is a first trimester undergraduate anatomy course. You don't have to have any science background. There's an approximately about 900 students has been each cohort. There's at least 20 health programs that feed into this course. So we have a very diverse group in terms of academic capability with the ATARs. They're coming in from either high school or mature age students, and also where they're wanting to take their health degrees and how much anatomy they really need to know. Of that 900, in the last 2 years, the cohort for international intake has been around 11 to 14%, but I have 30 to 33% of students identifying that English is an additional language for them. So a much larger proportion who may be domestic students where they are either bilingual or multilingual. So my concern was this increase in cognitive load that other students already had, but then the EAL students in particular would have, because they needed to learn the course content, the vocabulary, as well as academic English in order to exchange their knowledge and also for their assessment pieces. So serendipitous is exactly the word when I saw it in the chat before. Timing, I was invited to actually review some of Kelly's work for her HEA fellowship application, and that's when I read all about Translanguaging and went, that's what I need, that's what I want. So we've been chatting ever since, and with Helen as well, obviously our connection through the School of PAM and the anatomy background. So this has been really interesting in terms of, so far our pilot was run in T1 this year and has some very interesting side effects for our students, our sessional staff, and also the larger teaching staff, the academic staff. Thanks, Kelly. That's you next.
Thanks, Leanne. So for those that aren't aware around translanguaging, I'll just give a super quick intro. So it's really looking at a strength-based approach to people who are multilingual, plurilingual, bilingual, and looking at language as a resource rather than being a deficit perspective. So giving space for students to use all of their linguistic knowledge and understanding to actually engage in that academic learning and academic English as well. So it involves purposely including students' other languages and linguistic resources into that classroom space, and shifting that perspective is really important as well from the educator perspective, but also helping students who often come here thinking they have to speak English only in order to succeed. So sort of helping them shift their own perspectives as well. So it's really thinking about emerging bi or plurilingual individuals who have one linguistic repertoire. So all of this knowledge of the language that they have, that's in that little drawing there, around what they already know about language and what we can help to add to that repertoire and how they can draw on that in order to succeed at university. And so when people are plurilingual and have multiple languages in their repertoire, they really use these resources flexibly, creatively, and they have agency over how they do that. So we want to help students to be able to see that as a resource and learn how to use them flexibly for their own learning and appropriately, obviously, as well, in terms of, use as many resources as possible. When you do your exam, obviously, we need to have some English in there, but so figuring out how they can be using these resources and how we can be supporting that as well. So why do it? I have a really big list of whys. This is some of them, but basically, really helping the student individually to draw on their current knowledge, their metalinguistic knowledge and all these different things, but also that emotional well-being. So that frustration they may feel when they're in a new country, maybe, a new language, a new anatomy language, and really that struggle and frustration. So trying to mitigate some of that. helping to empower them. That emotional well-being is really important. I've got twice there, that's why it's important, sorry there. But also the social justice side. So by valuing people's languages and cultures and identities, then we're actually contributing to that, I guess, sort of getting away from that idea of a deficit and the fact that people that don't speak English as their first language are not as good as or need to speak English in order to be sort of an equal part of society. So that's a really important part for us around that social justice idea of valuing our students and valuing their language, but then by extension, their culture, their identities. So very quick, but I can talk more about translanguaging later if people are interested. So Leanne, do you want to tell us quickly about the course itself?
Sure. So in terms of the content embedded within this anatomy and physiology course, it is, as I mentioned, first trimester, first year. So it is an introductory level, but we've based it through over the 12 weeks. We have 6 modules, and each module is basically a human body system. So 2 weeks devoted to the skeletal system, followed by 2 weeks on the muscular system, 2 weeks on the nervous system, then the special senses, then the endocrine system, and then finally the reproductive system, male and female, and the overall implications there, and sort of connecting right through. So structure, anatomy, function, physiology is delivered in mixed mode. So we have our pre-recorded mini lectures are available online, and a lot of formative interactive learning that we've built in an online situation for them over the last few years. That's sort of been my little thing. So we've got that in, set up for their online component. But other than that, now that we're back on campus, all practicums in our cadaveric labs over in the facility that Helen has been the director or set up at the School of Anatomy are based in person now. And we also run workshops, sort of tutorial workshops weekly as well. So they've got the mini lectures are sort of chunked to about 20 minutes each, and each of the systems has on average 6 mini lectures over the 2 weeks that they will be listening to each. So time-wise, about 2 to 3 hours a week of their mini lectures. Obviously, when they're listening and stopping and pausing, it can take a little bit longer there. Certainly, EAL students have been doing that and taking longer to get that understanding. I have always provided English transcripts for them to make that a little bit easier to have that on hand, but obviously EAL students have another level that they're needing to translate back in their own home language first. The on-campus portion practicums, we have 10 back-to-back practicums, 2.5 hours each weekly, to cater to the large number of students that we have so that they have some interactive learning around our cadaveric stations. We'll have 6 to 8 sessional staff members in each practicum. So I have a 25 strong staff that work with us to be able to deploy those pracs. And then the workshops are run by one tutor, myself and an associate that works on the other tutorials for the week, as there's 10 of those, and they're 2 hour back-to-back. So we start with basic structure and function in the mini lectures. We don't repeat what's in the mini lectures, but we build on that and elaborate to then dysfunction or pathologies that might eventuate in those workshops. So we're building all the time. Ellie, do you want to talk a little bit about the project now?
Yeah, so the project that we're presenting on today is still ongoing. So we've done cycles of action research. So you can probably very familiar with action research in this group, I imagine. But what we found was we had to do multiple mini cycles within the cycle of action research. So we started with identifying the challenge and then planning the resources involved in actual implementation of a small project to kind of find out what we could do to actually benefit the students in this space. And so we did that, planning the resources as a mini action project, action research, and then implementing it, then evaluating it, and then reflecting on that, and then moving forward, doing it all again next T1 to sort of identify how we can improve on this process and continue to be applying this into the classroom space. So yeah, that's basically the sort of the research methodology. And then Leanne, back to you quickly.
No worries. So my the initial, the very first of those plans was then to look at what approach, what did we need to take. And so that was an early collaboration. Once we had our strategic grant that we were given, one of the suggestions at that point was to have an advisory panel up front. And so we did that with other members of the health group, not necessarily involved directly in the project, but in other schools and who may end up being a stakeholder in the future if this was something that could be rolled out and how they could be using it. The anatomy and physiology teaching team, myself, my associate lecturer who works with me to support that, and also Helen as the sort of senior anatomist did the group. And then we also took on board comments made and interactions by sessional staff members and our past EAL students who were then able to give specific strategies that they thought might be useful for implementation. Had that the ones who were in the 2022 cohort in T1, what would they have liked that would have benefited them? And so based on that feedback from the panel, and those students in particular, the most useful strategies that we used as the collective feedback to start with is translation of the English transcripts into Korean and Mandarin. And the reason we chose these two first, obviously we had a budget and a time frame that we need to work with. So the most frequently spoken non-English languages in T1 in both 2022 and 2023 were Korean, followed by Arabic, but then Chinese in Mandarin and Cantonese together were more than Arabic. So in addition to that, I have a very diverse sessional teaching team. So it was of benefit to me then to have those sessional staff members who had previously undertaken the anatomy course. They were now studying medicine and they were on my sessional team. They knew the content. They knew what was in the topics and they were able to assist with the translations. So they were done as an automatic word translation to start with, and then we employed the sessional staff members as research assistants to then review those, because obviously translations for language, particularly character languages, is not directly word for word, as you would know much better than me. And so they were able to use the English documents and the translated and then see what didn't match, what they could explain better in a small summary. And that was what was provided for the students. And so we've started with Mandarin and Korean there. And so we do know that vocabulary and the complex systems of anatomy are quite challenging. So we picked the ones that were most challenging to start with and also had a large number of topics. So those modules were broken up into mini lectures. Each mini lecture was a different topic. And so the ones that started that, skeletal system and muscular system, had more in them. So we started with those in terms of the translations. And it was deemed that the mini lecture transcripts would be the most useful piece of translation that we could utilise. Yes, Kelly, could you just move on there, please? Thank you. So then in terms of that next little action research cycle, when we were starting to look at the implementation in T1 this year, we translated those. So there was a lot of little pieces happening sort of simultaneously. So we had translation of those documents going on, as well as we had training for our sessional staff. So we wanted the sessional staff to actually understand what our goal was, and that wasn't just that there were resources available on the course site for the students. From my perspective, my service role is first year advisor. So I've put the other hat on now, my commencing student coordinator hat, that I really want those students to feel welcome and nurtured and not at a complete overwhelmed, distress state in their first experience in their first trimester. So my mum commencing student coordinator hat went on, and I wanted my sessional staff to understand what was going on. Fortunately, with the way that we have put our team together at this point, it is quite diverse, and I have Korean speaking, I have Mandarin speaking, Cantonese speaking staff on board. So even our English only speaking staff were trained, every single one of them, in what we wanted out of this project. Our staff all wear name badges regardless, but we thought it would be nice to include on those badges the known languages that they may speak as well. so that students could identify. Some of those sessional staff members were concerned that that would then direct students directly to them, and they were here to learn in English, and that it would actually be counterintuitive to what the intention was of them enrolling in the course from, as an international student, for example. However, we made it clear that that was not what we wanted, but that was what they could do as a form of clarification or to set up that. And it was an experience that some of our students had, or one of our, sessional staff members had in the previous year, where she spoke Cantonese, and she could see one of the students was really struggling in English, and they were talking in amongst themselves with another student of the same language, home language. And so after the lab had finished, she went over to them and spoke in their language, and then said, "Would you like me to clarify?" From that moment on, more than anything else, those two students were engaged. Every week they turned up and they asked questions. So it was really about that experience of making them feel welcome to use their language to clarify as a resource. They can look up the unknown words if they needed to. We wanted to encourage them to note take. And I had some of the sessional staff members say, "Oh, but I thought we were going to be doing that in English. We teach in English, we assess in English." No, we want them to use their characters, diagrams, whatever they want to take the notes in their practicum, their guidebooks. However, then we want them to discuss that content, maybe in their home language with one of their peers or their tutors, but then writing summaries or discussing summaries in English and how that they would, going forward, in how they would be assessed in it, for example. Thanks, Kelly.
So we're actually nearly out of time, I think. Like, we've only got a couple minutes left. So I might just have to quickly, Leanne, is that all right? If we just quickly just fast forward. I'll just pop up the slides with some of the results from what we've done. So we looked at analytics, we looked at set and sex comments, and we had focus groups that I ran with the tutors and the students that were involved in T1. So you can see that they were accessing the translated scripts. So there was quite a lot of sort of engagement with those resources that have been translated for the students. So I'll just run through not the detail of each of these results, but in terms of set and sec, so these were unsolicited comments in the set and sec results. So you can see people that even aren't EAL themselves were recognising the benefits of having this approach in the classroom, that it saved time and these kinds of things. And then we also had from the sessional tutors, that was some of our surprising results as they started to notice like what students were doing. And so this was a really key quote here from this first person saying, "I've been teaching this course for years with thousands of students, and I've only just noticed that they were writing in other languages in their notebooks." And that's like was, mind blowing for this person to realise that they hadn't actually been noticing this before, and then encouraging that and helping them saying, "Hey, talk to each other, figure it out together, and then come back to the English as well." And they talked about how students were using these resources, like look at the transcripts quickly, get a general gist of what was happening, and then go to the English and engage with the English with a much more like sort of solidified understanding of what they were going to read and have to learn in the English transcript as well. So the student focus groups talked a lot about how they use those documents. That saved time, that was useful to explain the concepts. They use them in really different ways depending on the individual, but also that shared language and that explanation to go ahead and use your languages, help each other in your shared language and then be able to bring it back to English. So they talked about that in the groups as well. Benefits for their actual bigger employability and how they could use this language understanding of these concepts and talk about anatomy in their work in Australia with people who are from those same backgrounds, or if they wanted to go back home and work in their home country, they were able to do that. And then reactions to the approach. So thinking about that emotional well-being and that, inclusivity that Leanne was saying about first-year students and, new to the country maybe. So they were really, surprised that this is happening, that it was really interesting that they could actually have these resources, that the teachers understood, where they were coming from, that there was at least this level of understanding that this was going to be hard for them. And they didn't speak English at that same level as some of the other students in the class. So there's just some of our initial reflections. So, that it supported their engagement. It was time saving. They had that increased feeling of well-being and connectedness around student success. That the staff and the students and us were all much more aware of what was happening and how the students use their languages themselves. So there's quite a few benefits coming out of that. We don't have data on specifically, if it helped their actual results in that sense, but that's something that we're thinking about for the next time, is how we could actually collect some of that type of data to see how it actually maybe affects their actual learning outcomes. So moving on, we're going to continue doing this next year and add in some extra resources and continue our analysis, because we're still in those earlier stages of that. And we'd really like to have some sort of model to be able to apply to other courses at Griffith in the health and also with other potential universities. So I know that Helen and Leanne have contacts with anatomy teachers in many other places, so who are potentially interested as well in this type of approach to teaching anatomy. So that's a really quick wrap up at the end there, but really happy that, we could share with you all. And I think that, again, like the first presentation, the journey and how we met and how we, connected this together and those shared values of what we want to achieve for the students in these courses and how we can do that together is a really key part of the whole project. And yeah, stay tuned for more of output and explanation of what we're doing. Is there anything else, Leanne or Helen, that you wanted to add in there?
I think Helen's had to run off, but yes, no, Kelly's been really instrumental in driving the publication component, and so we do have an article under review already, and I'm off to New Zealand in December to present this project at the Australia New Zealand Anatomical Clinical Anatomists Association conference. So they're excited about hearing that too. So that'll be on the podium rather than a poster. That was a bit of a surprise. So they're excited to hear about translanguaging too.
Wow, fantastic work. Big round of applause for both presentations. The second one just reminds me of, the absolute power of valuing what students bring to our learning environment. The asset-based approach, the resource-based approach is so much more powerful. So brilliant. And also the central role of language in everything we do. Absolutely everything. Language is crucial. Oh, be still my beating heart. EALD language literacy is my bag. So I really enjoyed both presentations. They were excellent. There's a couple of comments and questions in the chat, but I think most of them have been answered in the chat or through the last few slides. However, if anyone has a burning question or comment, please jump in right now.
Just a really quick, sincere thank you to Kelly for being part of our community. Kelly's joined us in the last 6 months or so, bringing your colleagues with you. It's really enriching because you can see already, you can see people are so interested. There are connections in places that we often don't think there are connections. And thank you.
Thanks,
absolutely. Jen. Yes, I echo that. It's really interesting if you do a language audit of your classrooms to see who speaks what languages in what contexts. You'll be very surprised, I think.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Look, it's 12:05. I'm mindful people probably need to move on unless there's something else that somebody would like to say or no? Okay. Can I give a shout out to Kelly's language podcast? You can find it on Spotify. It's very good. Jump in and check that out. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And there's a whole episode of me talking about translanguaging. So,
there you go.
Plus many other fascinating, episodes. So thank you.
Language, L-A-N-G.
I'll put it in the chat.
W-I-C-H. Yeah, really great little podcast. Thanks, everyone. Have a super Tuesday, and we'll see you at the next Lightning Talks.
And thank you, Jen. Bye.
My pleasure. Bye all.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.